President-elect Donald Trump makes his first big decision on the road to the White House, choosing RNC Chairman Reince Priebus as White House Chief of Staff and his former campaign CEO Steve Bannon as Chief Strategist and Senior Counselor. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Shannon Bream. Donald Trump spent his first weekend as president-elect at Trump Tower in New York City, where his trusted advisors got to work hammering out critical decisions like naming the White House Chief of Staff. We now know that all-important job goes to Reince Priebus, a Washington insider tied to the Republican establishment. We begin our coverage tonight with Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry and what this tells us, this pick potentially about a Trump presidency. Well,
Shannon, good to see you. And there's a practical part of this, which is that building a government is daunting enough. And there was a logjam on filling literally hundreds of jobs until Donald Trump got this power structure in place. But he also may be trying to fuse these vastly different wings of the Republican Party, the revolutionary side from Breitbart News and the establishment side from the RNC.
President-elect Donald Trump made it official, tapping Steve Bannon to be chief strategist and senior counselor, while Reince Priebus will serve as White House chief of staff.
Reince is a superstar.
The outgoing Republican Party chairman is more of a tactician, and his close ties with House Speaker and fellow Wisconsinite Paul Ryan may smooth the passage of Trump's legislative agenda. Bannon was more the big picture guy as CEO of the campaign and was a lightning rod of criticism because of his role in the alt-right movement, but has the loyalty of Trump after leading him to victory.
The thing about Steve Bannon that people don't understand is that in this campaign, he's been the general, and he's worked very closely with Reince Priebus and the rest of us.
Bannon tried quickly to tamp down speculation about two different power centers in the White House by touting their partnership, while Priebus vowed to help Trump, quote, create an economy that works for everyone, secure our borders, repeal and replace Obamacare, and destroy radical Islamic terrorism. The president-elect also signaled immigration as a top priority in an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes, vowing to swiftly deport millions of illegal immigrants.
Gang members, drug dealers, we have a lot of these people, probably 2 million, it could even be 3 million. We're getting them out of our country or we're going to incarcerate.
Picking an insider like Priebus may help in Washington, but is also a warning for Trump not to lose sight of the outsider message that got him elected.
The swamp doesn't want to be drained, and the swamp will just suck you in if you let it.
Trump, for example, set off alarm bells with supporters by listening to President Obama lobby him about keeping some of his legacy items in place, and then telling the Wall Street Journal and 60 Minutes in separate interviews that he'll keep some parts of Obamacare.
Also with the children living with their parents for an extended period.
Now, a lot of Trump critics are missing. He already said during the campaign he would keep popular parts of Obamacare, keeping kids on their parents' plans, and preventing insurance companies from not covering pre-existing conditions. Some of Trump's rabid supporters, though, want nothing short of a full repeal. And that's, Shannon, really the big problem, which is there's sort of a push and pull here. Is he going to deliver on radical reform, or is he going to find some compromises that upset his supporters?
Yeah, and as you and I know, it's very tricky on the Hill to get big things moving. But, you know, with the same party controlling multiple prongs now, there's a lot of pressure on them to get that done. I understand you have a little bit of behind the scenes about this power struggle that allegedly was going on that winded up with Reince Priebus in place.
There was some pushing for Bannon to be chief of staff, and I'm told that privately, both Speaker Paul Ryan and Senator McConnell, the majority leader, of course, called Donald Trump and personally lobbied hard for Priebus, Ryan being from Wisconsin as well. But this was also anti-Bannon. Let's not mask that, which is Bannon has been very direct in saying he wants Ryan out. He was pushing for his challenger in the primary to win. And so that is something to watch here. They won out this time, the congressional leaders, the insiders, but Bannon's still got power inside the White House. He's not going to forget that.
Yeah, absolutely, as chief strategist. Now, what about the influence of Vice President-elect Mike Pence, who's now heading this up?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be growing. I mean, I'm hearing that part of the reason that Chris Christie was sort of sidelined was not just about Bridgegate, but that people inside the transition say he was sort of stocking it with some of his own loyalists. That was alarming, both Mike Pence and Donald Trump, though I'm told that Christie is still in the running for a major job within the administration down the road. In terms of Pence, this is somebody who tomorrow night, we're told, is going to Florida. Florida. The Republican Governors Association is meeting. He's going to have a private dinner with them. He's obviously an outgoing Republican governor himself, but there are a lot of potential cabinet picks from the Republican governors. So he's got influence there. He used to be a leader in the House Republican Conference. He's going to be working with Ryan and McConnell, and now he's running the transition. The name Dick Cheney hasn't been used yet, Shannon, but in terms of vice president with real influence, Mike Pence is looking like someone who's got it.
Well, and there are a lot of people who say they want to see that. They felt like during the campaign that Trump was, a loose cannon at times.
A little bit undisciplined, right? And
yeah.
Mike Pence is somebody who's seen, frankly, that's why Donald Trump picked him, right? He's somebody who's different. He's not out on Twitter saying things. Instead, Mike Pence is very buttoned down, cautious, careful. That is a nice contrast to the guy at the top of the ticket and now the incoming president. They
complement each other well. Sides of the aisle have been responding to the news of Mr. Trump's appointment of Priebus via Twitter. House Speaker Paul Ryan said, quote, "I'm very proud and excited for my friend Reince. Congrats." Former senior advisor to President Obama, David Axelrod, also had positive feedback for the selection, tweeting, "Choice of Reince as COS Chief of Staff over Bannon seems like a strong signal that real Donald Trump is taking a more conventional, conservative path." And South Carolina Senator and former presidential candidate Lindsey Graham, I would say Trump nemesis as well, tweeted, "Congrats to real Donald Trump for outstanding choice of Reince to be Chief of Staff. This shows me he is serious about governing." And when it comes to getting legislation passed, Mr. Trump says that his conventional wisdom, it would look like he's going to have a leg up. His party's going to control chambers of Congress, both the House and Senate, but many congressional Republicans had serious concerns about their party's candidate, questioning his conservative credentials. Kristen Fisher reports on Trump's complicated relationship with Capitol Hill as the president-elect lays out an ambitious 100-day plan.
One of the top priorities for President-elect Donald Trump will be the same issue that first propelled him to frontrunner status during the primaries, immigration. Mr. Trump now says he plans to deport 2 to 3 million undocumented immigrants right away.
We're getting them out of our country. They're here illegally.
But that's very different from what the top two Republicans in the House said just this morning. Both House Speaker Paul Ryan and House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy say their top priority is securing the border, not mass deportations.
That is not what we're focused on. We're focused on securing the border. We think that's first and foremost, before we get into any other immigration issue, we got to know who's coming and going in the country. We've got to secure the border.
First thing you have to do is secure the border, and then we'll have the discussions as we move forward.
Despite those differences and despite their deep divisions during the campaign season, Speaker Ryan now says the past is the past and that he's excited to work with Mr. Trump to fulfill his campaign promises. At the top of that list, repealing and replacing Obamacare, even though the president-elect signaled on Friday that he might be open to keeping at least 2 provisions of the health care law. Another priority, jobs. Mr. Trump says he can create millions of them through his 10-year $1 trillion infrastructure plan, though that'll likely be opposed by some conservatives in Congress who are wary of any more government spending. But 2 issues where both sides will almost certainly see eye to eye are the appointment of a conservative justice to the Supreme Court and the rolling back of regulations on Wall Street.
Because there's also a lot of regulations that need to be rolled back, and there's a lot of executive orders that President Trump is going to have to deal with in the first few days that he's in office. But with the Republicans having the House and Senate and the presidency, I think that we're more optimistic than ever.
Now, in terms of timing, things will likely move very quickly as soon as the next Congress is sworn in. In fact, today, the House Majority Leader said that they're not even going to wait until Inauguration Day. They're going to get started on this agenda the very first week in January. Shannon.
All right, Kristen Fisher with a look at the future. Thank you. And for the man who wrote The Art of the Deal, Donald Trump may be taking another look at a landmark agreement the U.S. and 5 other world powers reached with Iran over its nuclear program. But the Obama administration and many in the international community say the president-elect should play the hand dealt him. Our chief Washington correspondent James Rosen looks ahead to President Trump's options and obstacles.
When I look at the Iran deal and how bad a deal it is for us.
As a candidate, Donald Trump blasted the Iranian nuclear deal as one of the worst ever negotiated. But a year ago, he signaled he wouldn't just walk away from it.
It's very tough to do when you say rip up a deal, because I'm a deal person, but I will police that deal. You know, I've taken over some bad contracts. I would police that contract so tough that they don't have a chance. As bad as the contract is, I will be so tough on that contract.
Negotiated by the U.S., Iran, Britain, France, China, Russia, and Germany, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, was not a treaty, only an executive agreement never ratified by the U.S. Congress. However, the deal was codified as international law by the UN Security Council, and the Iranians call it reasonable and good for everybody.
Doesn't mean that we do not have other options. Iran wants to remain committed to JCPOA, provided that everybody else is prepared to do the same.
Critics say the Trump administration will be able to veto any UN Security Council measure designed to constrain the new president's options for enforcing or nullifying the deal.
When it's not a treaty, just signed by the president, the next president can repudiate it like that.
White House aides are already warning their successors that America's allies will not respond well to any unilateral abrogation of the deal by the U.S.
President-elect Trump will have to decide what impact sort of a unilateral withdrawal would have on our relationship with countries around the world.
Fred Fleitz, a 25-year CIA veteran, mentioned as a possible CIA director in the next administration, is a prominent critic of the deal and author of the book Obama Bomb.
There's no doubt that if Mr. Trump backed out of the deal or started a tough negotiation that killed the deal, that our European allies will be very upset, that the United Nations will be very upset. But you know, Europe does not run U.S. foreign policy. We need to have a tough president who acts on principle on this matter.
If the incoming president polices the Iran deal aggressively as promised, he may find grounds for breach. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed last week that Iran has twice this year exceeded the caps placed on its production of heavy water, a key ingredient in a plutonium path to nuclear weapons. The State Department said, Shannon, that it is preparing to ship the excess heavy water out of the country.
It is one to watch, certainly, and we're going to talk about it with the panel coming up.
Terrific.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Trump has vowed to get tough with Iran, and he could get an assist on that from Congress. I spoke earlier with another outspoken critic of the Iran deal who may turn out to be one of Trump's best allies on Capitol Hill. Intelligence and Armed Services Committee member, GOP Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, thank you for joining us tonight. Good to have you. An historic election this week, a lot of changes coming to Washington. Let me talk with you about, first of all, the Iran deal. It is something that you were not a fan of. Donald Trump has said it was, quote, the stupidest deal he's ever seen, and he wants to take steps to undo it. How can he do that? Can Congress be a part of that? How will it work?
Well, Donald Trump's right. The Iran deal was the stupidest deal any of us have ever seen. In fact, Iran is violating that deal already. The Obama administration just acknowledged last week that there's another violation of it. The Congress, working with President-elect Trump, can reimpose sanctions on Iran. We can work with our allies to reimpose those sanctions. We have a lot of leverage. We're the world's largest economy by far. We can impose those sanctions for their violations of the nuclear deal and their violations of other obligations, like not building ballistic missiles that can reach U.S. troops and our allies, or not sponsoring terrorism that's been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans, and not destabilizing the entire region. So I look forward very much with working with President-elect Trump to make sure that Iran doesn't continue to threaten American citizens and American interests around the world.
There's been a lot made of the fact that a Trump administration is going to approach Iran very differently than an Obama administration did. Some people see that as a positive, some see it as a negative. How do you think it'll work out?
Well, you know, Donald Trump throughout the campaign said that he was going to stand up for American interests, and he was going to take a tougher line with many of our adversaries around the world. And I think that's very important because Iran has been allowed to run wild throughout the Middle East for the last 8 years. The president focused more than anything on getting this nuclear deal, no matter what the terms were. That's one reason why Iran has been destabilizing the region in places like Iraq and Syria, while they continue to support terrorism. And Iran needs to understand that Donald Trump is going to be a different kind of president. Just like the Ayatollahs understood that Ronald Reagan was going to be a different kind of president than Jimmy Carter was, and therefore they released all those hostages the very day that Ronald Reagan was sworn into office.
What about Syria?
Syria's a very complicated situation because President Obama has stood at a distance and let Syria burn for 5 years. You've had the rise of the Islamic State. You now have Russia that's reasserting itself as a major power in the Middle East for the first time in 40 years. You have a mass humanitarian crisis. So we have troops on the ground in Iraq and in Syria. Ultimately, though, we have to focus on American interests, which is destroying the Islamic State once and for all and ensuring that Syria doesn't become a safe haven for terrorist organizations like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda to launch attacks against us of the kind that we saw in 9/11. Donald Trump made these points throughout the campaign. I think that's one reason why he won last week, because the American people are ready for a president who is going to take a little bit firmer line in defense of American interests.
And of course, his critics say that he is a hothead. They worry how he's going to deal with foreign leaders, how he'll relate to them, how he'll handle these very serious foreign policy challenges. You have been supportive of him as the nominee throughout this process. I know you've talked with him. Do you think it's set into him what he's facing, what the reality of what the 45th president of the United States is walking into?
I believe it has. No one can be fully prepared to be president until they take that oath of office on Inauguration Day. But I know that many world leaders have been calling Donald Trump to congratulate him. I'm sure those calls have been going very well. Again, we need a new president who is a bit tougher in the defense of American interests. Donald Trump campaigned on that. That's one reason why he won. I think most world leaders realize that America is going to take a tougher line in the world again. That's not just something that our adversaries need to hear. That's also something that our allies around the world have been seeking for a long time, the kind of reassurance that Donald Trump is going to provide them after 8 years of Barack Obama retreating from around the world.
I want to ask you a domestic question before we let you go about the Supreme Court. It's going to be one of the very first big decisions that President-elect Trump will have to make. Several of your colleagues have been floated, Senator Lee, Senator Ayotte, Senator Cruz, and others. What kind of fight do you think he's going to have in the Senate? I mean, the GOP remains in control, but you don't have the 60 votes to get past that first procedural hurdle. Will some Democrats come on board and help? Do you think that there is some room to work together there on a nominee?
Well, I hope so. Again, Donald Trump promised throughout the campaign to nominate a jurist who would respect the Constitution and the laws of the United States as they're written, not try to impose his or her preferences on the law. He put out a list of 20-something candidates to be his nominee. I think they're all great potential nominees to the Supreme Court. I would encourage him to do that sooner rather than later. The Congress takes its, the new Congress sits about 2 weeks before Donald Trump will get sworn in, so he could submit that, or he can nominate that person beforehand, and much like you do with the cabinet every 8 years, we could start hearings early in January and then maybe have that new justice confirmed by late in January.
There's a lot of work waiting for them and 8 anxious justices to find out who it's going to be. Senator, thank you for stopping in. Good to see you.
Thanks, Shannon. Great to be on with you.
And in other headlines, the man authorities say shot and killed a sheriff's deputy in California this morning is now in police custody. David Machado, described as a, quote, known criminal by police, was arrested this afternoon. Machado is suspected of killing this man, Deputy Dennis Wallace of the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Office, in what officials are calling an execution. Wallace was responding to a suspicious vehicle call and it reportedly determined that the car Machado was driving was stolen. At least 2 people are dead after a massive earthquake rocked New Zealand. The magnitude 7.8 earthquake hit a mostly rural area, but still damaged buildings and roads. The nation's emergency services officials have warned people to move to higher ground in order to avoid tsunamis. Iraqi forces are closing in on the ISIS stronghold of Mosul. Troops have hit the region on all sides, recently recapturing the city of Nimrud, which is near famed ancient ruins. Iraqi forces are trying to avoid civilian casualties as they advance on the city, but say ISIS is using civilians as human shields. Still ahead, picking up the pieces, Democrats debate their party's future. Will it veer farther left? Plus, the brand new era coming to Washington. Can President-elect Donald Trump make Congress make some deals on his ambitious agenda? Tucker Carlson weighs in and previews his brand new show, which premieres tomorrow night. As Republicans prepare to control both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, Democrats across the country are looking for clues as to when Ross's nuclear and key leadership positions up for grabs. Which wing of the party will seize the moment? Doug McKelway reports on the path forward for Democrats.
For Democrats still reeling from the shock of Tuesday's loss, the first hints of transition are beginning to take shape, as is the realization the party must change.
I think
He was having some problems with that piece right there. I can tell you that Democratic Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison is now considering a run to be chairman of the DNC. He is a far left African-American Muslim, and they see him as a foil, basically, to Donald Trump's candidacy. In addition to that, we're hearing that Howard Dean, the former Vermont governor and one-time presidential candidate, is also considering a run for the DNC chairman. He believes that the way for Democrats to reclaim their ascendancy is for them to go after young people. Of course, that's something exactly what Bernie Sanders did to no avail, even though he did manage to capture huge crowds as well. But they've got a long, long way to go. Republicans were so successful after their stinging 2008 defeat to try to reclaim power by going after the state houses. They made a concerted effort to reclaim the state houses, and then following the 2010 census to reshape congressional districts. The result was scores of GOP-held House districts where it remains nearly impossible to this day for Republican incumbents to lose, at least until the next census in 2020. Shannon, back to you.
Well, Doug, and you mentioned Bernie Sanders. He certainly brought a lot of young people into the fold, and many of them felt betrayed when they essentially felt like there were emails within the DNC that were exposed after a hack that made it seem as if the DNC was working to aid Mrs. Clinton versus Senator Sanders. Any sense of where the party is going with that particular division?
Well, it's really hard to say. I think that they have to make a concerted effort to go after them. Young people, again, as Howard Dean suggested, they also have to make sure that there is no perception that the process is rigged, as many of those young people felt it was when we saw those emails indicating that Clinton was favored by the power structure of the DNC. So the more they can convey to young people that this is an open and fair process, the more likely those young people are to show up at the polling booths come 2020.
All right, Doug McKelway, thank you so much, and maybe we'll get the kinks worked out and get your piece back on. Thank you. Okay. All right, here at Fox News, we have some news of our own. Tucker Carlson Tonight premieres tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. I talked with Tucker today to get details on his new show and his take on the president-elect. Tucker Carlson, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, listen, let's talk about the incoming administration, the Trump administration. I feel like there are a lot of people who, they are still quite shell-shocked, especially on the left. They cannot believe this happened, and they didn't see it coming. They never entertained the possibility that and they can't say the words President Trump, but it's going to be reality very soon.
It's like a ghost town on my street in Northwest D.C. I don't know if everyone's gone for the weekend. I've been gone for like a year. I just got back. Right. There's nobody there. I mean, maybe they abandoned their homes.
They've moved to Canada.
I'm going to squat in one if that's the case.
Are these all the people who promised to move to Canada? It might be your whole neighborhood's gone.
I can say this about Trump. I'm not flacking for Trump. Not popular in the lobbyist community at all. Trump is the only president ever, probably, certainly in this era, to come into office owing nothing to anybody. Nothing. He took no money from anybody, got no substantial advice from anybody, and he has nothing to owe the lobbying world at all. That's never happened.
Okay, so, but when he comes in, there's a lot to get done. He has a very ambitious agenda, as any incoming president does, but Obamacare, infrastructure plans that people on both sides of the aisle are critical. It's going to cost too much money. Where is that coming from? Defense issues. There's so much for him to tackle. How do you think he's going to be on Capitol Hill? Because he does brand himself as a deal maker, and I suspect that he'll work across the aisle.
Of course he will. And he's less ideologically rooted than any president in our lifetimes also. I mean, he's not tied to a specific ideological agenda. We've never seen anyone like this. He's going to do the things he said he was going to do. He's going to try. Anyway, he has to. And that's always the case with incoming presidents. What did he promise on the campaign trail? He promised to get serious about the border. He promised to change the way we address trade. That's real. I don't think we're going to slap a 33% tariff on Chinese goods or anything, but he's definitely going to assess whether or not other nations are complying with our trade agreements, and I think he's going to try to undo Obamacare. Yeah.
So he's got a lot to do, but you do think that he's going to try to build coalitions. Let's talk about you, because you've got a lot of work to do too. Starting Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, Tucker Carlson Tonight. Are we going with the TCT?
I think we're going TCT.
So we can
I have trouble saying
hip and cool about it.
I have a little trouble saying my own name out loud. It just feels very. I can hear my father saying, "Stop talking about yourself."
Okay, so we'll go with TCT.
We'll go with TCT.
What can you tell us about TCT on a hot, medium to caliente scale? Spicy, what are we doing?
I would say muy caliente. The kind of thing where you choke a little bit, but the aftertaste is fantastic. Look, if there's one lesson from this election season, it's that the people in power on both sides, honestly, they lie a lot. There's a lot of duplicity, yes, an awful lot, and that there is a reward in calling them on it. And also, by the way, it's exhilarating and fun to, not in a cruel way. I mean, I don't believe in shouting. I'd rather laugh than yell, for sure. But I also think there's real value in saying, stop. You know, that's not actually what's happening. You're not telling the truth, and to try and force the point a little bit.
Will there be occasional bow tie nights?
There will never be a bow tie night.
Never?
There will never be a bow tie night.
Okay, so your hashtag never bow tie? We're going with that. Hashtag TCT, hashtag never bow tie. It all starts 7 o'clock tomorrow night.
I never say never. Thank you, though, Shannon.
All right, great to see you. And we're looking forward to the show.
See you tomorrow.
All right.
All right, how will Reince Priebus steer the Trump administration as White House Chief of Staff? Our panel is going to weigh in coming up. Donald Trump is prepping for his move to Pennsylvania Avenue, but 2 states still have not named an official winner for the presidential race. Michigan still counting ballots after Tuesday's razor-thin close election, as is New Hampshire. Both states have yet to declare who will get their state's electoral college votes. And in North Carolina, Governor Pat McCrory's re-election bid against Democrat Roy Cooper is still up in the air as officials conduct a recount. Despite the fact of that, Cooper has caused some controversy for going ahead to claim victory. And the Louisiana Senate race, which at one point had 24 candidates in the field, is down to just 2. Republican John Kennedy and Democrat Foster Campbell, with a December 10th runoff scheduled. A Democratic win in Louisiana would not tip the balance of power in the Senate, though, because 51 Republicans at least already set to hold seats in the chamber when the next Congress is sworn in. 4 races still undecided in the House, 2 in California, 2 in Louisiana, but GOP losses in those 4 would not have an effect on Republican control of the House. And Congress will be back in session tomorrow morning in a lame duck session, but with key issues still to be resolved, namely how to keep the government funded past December 9th when the current budget measure expires. The House and Senate also have to hash out differences on a defense spending bill. President Obama has threatened to veto the House version. All right, let's bring in our Sunday night panel.
Have done this before. You can't just appoint novices. You have to have people who know what they're doing. But at the same time, moving forward, this is an administration that's going to run very differently than typical Washington.
Our all-stars tonight: A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics; Charles Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times; Daniel Halper, online Washington bureau chief for the New York Post; and Tom Rogan, columnist with National Review. Great to see all of you tonight.
Good to be with you.
All right, Tom, you said you still have some friends who are recovering, as we talked about, from Brexit. They're still digesting the Trump election, but he's now full on in transition mode. We have 2 names today: Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon, with different roles. 2 very different guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think most Republicans in Washington will be very happy with the choice of Reince Priebus, because he is seen as someone who can go and meet with not just Republicans on the Hill, but Democrats, a good interlocutor for President Trump. I think what's also interesting is you see the divergence now in the international community. The British government really making a lot of effort to outreach towards Donald Trump, called their foreign minister away from an EU meeting, which essentially was going to complain about Donald Trump. But other EU nations, notably Germany, still putting a very tough line there. And so it's very interesting to see how that binding influence of Brexit and Trump is not just the electoral surprise, but actually new kind of alliances in international politics.
We had some positive tweets today. One from Senator Lindsey Graham, who was not a Trump fan, a one-time presidential rival to him during the primaries. He said, "Congrats to @RealDonald Trump for outstanding choice of Reince to be chief of staff. This shows me he is serious about governing." There was also a Newt Gingrich tweet. He says, "The Bannon-Priebus team is a tremendous choice by President-elect Trump. Bannon for key strategies, Priebus for daily management. Great team." Now, Daniel, you know, Twitter's also filled with a lot of people who don't like these choices. They're accusing Bannon of being a racist, far alt-right, white national supremacist, or ties to those groups. So it's playing very differently.
Yeah, look, like with much else with Donald Trump, if you're inclined to dislike him, you're going to hate this, and you're going to think Stephen Bannon up there in the White House, this is really bad news. Reince Priebus there, he is by definition the Republican establishment. But if you're inclined to like Donald Trump, you of course will find positive things to like about this. Reince Priebus shows that he can work with Paul Ryan and work with Capitol Hill and work with the Republican establishment to try to transform Washington in the way Donald Trump will be. And of course, plenty of people at home are like Breitbart and like Stephen Bannon, and we'll find a lot to like in him. But I think there's a lot to read into it, is what I'm trying to say. But the key here is that Donald Trump had a winning team that brought him to the White House, or that is bringing him to the White House, but successfully won this presidential election, and he is sticking with the exact same team all the way through. And I think people are probably reading a little bit too much into it and what they want to see into it, rather than just, this is the guy who wants to keep the old band back together because they helped him win, and he wants to move them into the White House together.
And Charlie, he's always campaigned on the fact that he's an outsider. He's not part of the Washington elite. He's not part of that group. But by leaning on someone like Reince, I mean, he's definitely pulling in the more established part of the party, those connections. And, some folks say that gives them reassurance, like Lindsey Graham, that he's serious about actually governing and being the president.
Well, I think that one of the big problems that President-elect Trump has to begin with is the fact that he has run such an outsider campaign. And this is a very screwed up, complex town where you have a lot of various centers of power, and it could be a nightmare for anybody. I think it shows a degree of wisdom that he would bring in somebody that does at least know Washington. I think that watching some of the things that some of the statements that we've seen from, as you showed with Lindsey Graham and others in Congress, I've been surprised by that. They've been far more positive than I thought that they would be. But he faces a Republican Congress that really does. They're not going to give in to him, I don't think. I think that it's going to be an adversarial relationship, and that's a wonderful thing for America. And then in terms of Steve Bannon, Bannon was very much the heart and soul of that campaign, and I think that he is smart to have someone around who will remind him of just and as hot and raw and as unpleasant as a lot of the views that a lot of voters have about this place. I think it's important that Trump be reminded of that while he's in the White House.
Somebody who has been talked about a lot and was on the Trump support bandwagon very early, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say about how they're going to put together this team and who may be on it.
I think they're going to look very hard for people who are committed to change, who understand the general direction, not just of President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Pence, but also of the Americans who elected them. There was a real popular surge of people who want Washington changed, and that's the people who President-elect Trump represents.
So, A.B., do you think he does some picks out of left field, some very different people who aren't Washington insiders? I mean, we know he had people surrounding him like Senator Jeff Sessions. A lot of people think he's going to be offered a cabinet position, and some other names we're familiar with. But do you think he does anything really outside the box?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did something just sort of unorthodox, maybe name a Democrat too here or there. I think that people are watching. They're watching the announcement about Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus. And as you saw, Paul Ryan and Senator Lindsey Graham said, this is really great news that he's picked Reince Priebus as chief of staff. No mention of Bannon. So then you have Gingrich's tweet that says, the Bannon-Priebus news is so exciting, or whatever he said, Bannon first. The press release named them as co-equals, using that word. Bannon announced on top of Reince Priebus's name. Titles don't matter in Trump's world. He only consults with a few people, and he ultimately makes up his mind by himself. Steve Bannon makes him feel good. He tells him he's a movement leader, and he's changing the country, and he's moving something historical. The rest of the people around him are just managing him all the time and trying to normalize him and trying to stop him and put him into wedges. And so he's going to probably surround himself with the people that make him feel the best. Jeff Sessions has been loyal. He'll probably give him a job. Rudy Giuliani, Newt Gingrich. And I expect a lot of surprises in the other positions. But the concern for everyone at this point is the national security security staff, many of which decided a long time ago, were very vocal about the fact that he was unfit to serve, didn't have the temperament to be commander-in-chief. They really need to come on board. And that really, I think, is the thing making the people most nervous, who are watching the transition as he fills these spots.
Well, Tom, what do you think the mood is like at the Pentagon Defense Department when he obviously had the famous statement during the campaign talking about the fact that he knew more about ISIS than the generals did?
Yeah.
That didn't go over well with a lot of folks in the Pentagon.
No, it didn't. I think people have been pleasantly surprised, though, in general, in the sense that he had that meeting with President Obama in which there was he was calm compared to perhaps his previous statements about the president.
He looked a little bit sobered.
He did, and I think that's the other fact. I did a piece for National Review last week talking about the sort of national security team that, you know, the potential to sort of bring back that establishment, not neocon but realist. One of the interesting things is how much is his the presidential daily brief, which he now gets, subject to President Obama's decision on sources and methods, but essentially he gets the real meat of it now. He knows what the Russians are doing. He knows that through human source, the very highest level stuff. And I think that's part of the sobering influence, because when you see that and you see where it comes from, it's very hard to say, I don't believe it, it's fake. And I think that influence is like, wow, now it's up to me, and if I fail, it's my legacy as well as the country. So I think that sobering influence is why a lot of people are slightly more comfortable. But again, as AB says, time will tell.
Yeah,
the appointments will tell.
Daniel, how much do his choices say about the kind of administration that he plans to run as we get more names?
I think it says a lot, and I think from this, again, we learned that he values loyalty, he values people who he trusts, and he wants to keep them close. These White House jobs are, this is why we're talking about it, they're extremely important. They make very big decisions, and they help decide what the president decides and what decisions the president's going to see. So they're immensely important, and we don't know these people. They don't require Senate confirmation like the cabinet members, who in a way are sort of less important. They're certainly more high profile, but they make decisions that aren't as consequential as the president will. And so obviously these are hugely important, which is exactly why we're talking about it.
Charlie, do you think that he's on track with a transition? Because there's some folks who say, listen, they didn't truly expect that he was going to win, that there are, now 4,000 positions, all these administrative and bureaucratic things that have to be filled. Do you think that they were prepared to dive into that level of personnel appointments?
There's no doubt that, leading into the election, that a lot of his supporters were believing the, onslaught of media that was saying there's no way he's going to win, that she's going to win, and she's going to win by over 300 electoral college votes. And so I think that there was some sort of surprise in the last week, and then certainly afterwards. Oh my goodness, we really might catch the car that we've been chasing, and now they have, and so they have to do all that. But it is because he has run such an unorthodox campaign. It is an opportunity for him to do a lot of unorthodox things now, and he can talk about provocative picks like a Newt Gingrich in an important position that would make a lot of people in Washington freak out. And a lot of the people that supported him they would love to see Washington freak out.
Well, yeah, I think that's why people voted for him in large part. AB, the removal of Governor Christie is kind of leading the effort, and now Vice President-elect Mike Pence, it sounds like he's got a lot of influence and he's got his ear as he makes these big decisions.
Right. I think the children who really, ultimately it's his daughter and his son-in-law that are the most important people on this entire planet. And so that's why I said titles don't matter. You can be chief of staff, you can be chief strategist, but he's going to call Jared whenever he wants to talk about decision making, and his daughter. So they intervened, right? And they got rid of Corey Lewandowski, a former campaign manager, and then they had Paul Manafort in his place. And then ultimately, Paul Manafort went by the wayside mid-August, and Steve Bannon and Conway took over. Trump as he makes these decisions, he is dealing with a little bit of a team of rivals, and so you have that discomfort between Jared Kushner and Chris Christie. Chris Christie was so loyal to Trump. Trump felt that he wanted to reward that. It's not surprising after the children promoted Mike Pence, and Pence proved to be so loyal that he ended up superseding Chris Christie and was able to take on a bigger role, and Chris Christie got the rub out. He's had some bad news stories out of the Bridgegate thing, and it just doesn't come as a surprise.
So he's kind of Lincolnian.
We'll leave that there. In the meantime, Ed Henry is reporting that we'll probably get some other names for big positions this week, so we'll bring you that as soon as we get it. Next up, our Fair and Balanced panel weighs in on Trump's ambitious 100-day agenda, and can he pull it off?
It will be repealed and replaced, and we'll know. And it'll be great health care for much less money.
President-elect Donald Trump there talking about his plans for Obamacare, and we are back with our panel. AB, he's taking a lot of heat because, you know, a lot of folks on the left saying, oh, millions are going to be left without health care. But he's saying, listen, I want to leave pre-existing conditions coverage. I want people to be able to stay on until they're 26. And a lot of what he's proposing, we've already seen the GOP propose in numerous measures on the Hill. Does he get it across the finish line this time?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So he acknowledged actually in this interview that that's expensive. Keeping the popular components of Obamacare costs a lot of money, and it's obviously the insurance companies are not going to go along with no pre-existing conditions without a mandate, and it's not that simple. But I think they'll be able to do something really quickly. It looks like they'll have 2 years after they repeal it to come up with a replacement, in which time everyone will be covered under their current Obamacare coverage, and then they're going to have to come up with that, and they can. I think 2 years of fighting will get the job done. I think if they were trying to do it, by end of March or something, it would be contentious. But I think there's probably a roadmap for them to get something to replace it by the time people have a lapse in their coverage.
Yeah. And Charlie, how much do you see him relying on Speaker Ryan or others on the Hill? Because really hammering out, as we all know, the details of the thousands of pages of whatever is going to come next as the replacement or addition or revision to it. I mean, that's the hardcore policy work that a lot of people wonder whether Trump will be fully engaged in.
And I think that Trump is smart enough to realize that there are people on Capitol Hill who are very good at this sort of thing, and I think that he will rely on them a whole lot, and he'll have helping him along the way the very strange, bizarre fact that he actually had coattails in this election, which nobody thought he would. And so there are people who are, maybe they don't feel like they owe him, they're certainly appreciative of him, but even better than that for him, he has Democrats who are going to be up in 2 years, many of them in states that he won, and they're kind of worried right now, and they sort of have a huge incentive to actually work with Republicans. And I keep going back to the same thing, and that is they have so decimated sort of the party rigor structure that you now have a Republican in the White House and two Republican chambers in Congress, and they're going to be at odds with one another. And I think that's fantastic. I really do.
Well, and I think the Founding Fathers in a lot of ways envisioned that and thought it was going to be a good idea too. Another issue, of course, immigration. Here's a little bit more of what Mr. Trump said in that 60 Minutes interview. This is about deportation specifically.
What we are going to do is get the people that are criminal and have criminal records, gang members, drug dealers. We have a lot of these people, probably 2 million, it could even be 3 million. We're getting them out of our country, or we're going to incarcerate. But we're getting them out of our country. They're here illegally.
Daniel, how does he logistically get that done? Can he?
Well, he needs to first build the wall, right? I mean, this is the key.
And he says that's still coming.
And
still getting the wall.
I think Donald Trump needs to assume that the goodwill in Washington and with members of Congress is at its highest level that it will ever be. When Barack Obama came into office, it was at his highest level for him and for a lot of presidents. When they're elected, that's when people like them the most. That's when they're most popular. And he should shoot to get as much as he can get done in the next 100 days, or the first 100 days of his presidency, including trade, Obamacare, immigration. He should get the big things done, satisfy those campaign promises. It will give him a lot of ability to do whatever he wants afterward and to get other things done. And I think it will give him a lot of goodwill. If people say Congress and Washington is now getting things done and fixing these problems, and he's using that goodwill to get things done, I think it will amount to more things. If he slow walks it a little bit, it creates time for people to complain, for people to say that it's wrong, for arguments to break out, and I think that would not be as good for him.
Yeah, and Tom, how much backlash does he get if he walks into this with Republicans controlling the White House, the Senate, the House, and they don't get some of these big items done?
I think he's going to get from his support base, which is just, if you think about it, so profound in terms of what he did, shaking up that map. I think he gets time. I think he has more time than perhaps people think. But I do think it becomes very important for him personally in terms of his, how he appears. Right, the mirror is very important to him. Both, and I don't mean that in a flippant way, but in specific, his own personal identity. And so, in policy terms, I think if he doesn't get at least one thing done, whether that be I think trade deal with the UK will come quickly. The British government and I think the Trump administration will. I think they both have alignment there because it's not, it's high value trade, so it's not losing jobs necessarily, or it has that issue. But on things like Obamacare, Supreme Court nominees, textbook issues, I think he'll want to push at least. I don't know I think he has, because of what he has done and because of the disarray of the Democrats, I actually think he has quite a lot of political space, even more so than President Obama did.
Well, and you mentioned Supreme Court. Of course, that's my beat, and so that's one of my favorite topics. That's going to be a big first decision for him, naming somebody. He's given us a list and has said apparently he's going to stick to these two lists. Who thinks that the conservatives are going to really push hard on this, and if they don't get somebody that many of them said was the only reason they voted for him, that it's going to be bad for him?
You can't overstate how important that issue was, and that was Mitch McConnell who ensured that became an issue by deciding to block Merrick Garland. And I think that but by the same token, if he missteps on this, it will blow up in his face worse than I think anybody could imagine.
Any names that catch your fancy out there, or you think that he's likely to? We understand he's still in conversations, and Mitch McConnell said they were going to talk about this some more, but he's got folks like Senator Mike Lee on his list, who distanced himself a bit from Trump during the campaign, but may not turn down the opportunity to be a justice.
Somebody like Ted Cruz could be smart, right? Get rid of exactly. Move your biggest rival in the primary.
He wasn't on the list. He was not on the two list, but still,
and there's a lot of people in the Senate who don't like him, so his confirmation
maybe they vote him
is not necessary.
So but they send him to the Supreme Court, and then he has a lifetime appointment, and
there
they don't have to deal with him.
There are a lot of things that he can do that would help him politically with the Supreme Court nomination.
AB?
I don't think Donald Trump chose the names on the lists, and I don't think he could recall 5 of them if you asked him right now to name who's on the list. And I think he could actually surprise everyone and pick someone who's not on the list, because that's the way that he is. But I think he will definitely listen to the pressure that Charlie's talking about and pick someone that everyone is going to be a consensus pick, definitely on the first one out of the box. I think he wants that honeymoon to last, and I think he'll make a decision that everyone else makes for him on the first SCOTUS pick. I do.
Well, we will see. He'll refresh himself on the list of the 21 names, the do list, and we'll see what it is. And very quickly, I'm sure.
In my life and time, a song, a lot of song, I made some bad.
Sad news from the world of music. The multi-talented Leon Russell has died. With his distinctive long white hair and beard, the Oklahoma native played keyboard, guitar, and percussion for a diverse group of talent. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member is most known for his work with the Beach Boys, Bob Dylan, Doris Day, B.B. King, the Rolling Stones, and Frank Sinatra. Leon Russell was 74. That's quite a diverse group of musical acts there. By the way, do not forget tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Tucker Carlson Tonight premieres right here on Fox, 7 p.m. Eastern. You don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for inviting us into your home tonight. That is it for this edition of Special Report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Justice with Judge Deneen starts next.